Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A hand-delivered 6-page letter. With that, Theresa May has made history. She's written to the President of the European Council, formally announcing Britain's intention to leave the EU, a process that will see the end of 4 decades of membership that have shaped so much in our daily lives. The Prime Minister said Britain would be able to make its own decisions, but continue to have a deep and special relationship with the EU. For the European Union, the President of the Council said this was not a happy day for either Brussels or London. But he added his goal now was to defend the interests of the remaining 27 members of the EU. For our first report tonight, here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Some moments make us. This is one. The minute in Westminster, Belfast, Edinburgh and Cardiff that the United Kingdom formally changed course.
The Article 50 process is now underway, and in accordance with the wishes of the British people, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union. This is an historic moment from which there can be no turning back.
Probably our last ambassador to the European Union, handing over the letter at 12:25. The document that says we're on our way out. Theresa May's signature on our departure. Her job now to make it work. This, her hope.
A country that goes out into the world to build relationships with old friends and new allies alike. And that is why I have set out a clear and ambitious plan for the negotiations ahead. It is a plan for a new, deep and special partnership between Britain and the European Union.
Her decisions about how mean we're out of the single market to control immigration.
European leaders have said many times that we cannot cherry-pick and remain members of the single market without accepting the 4 freedoms that are indivisible. We respect that position.
A friendlier tone to the continent and an ambition to bring this country together.
But, Mr. Speaker, when I sit around the negotiating table in the months ahead, I will represent every person in the United Kingdom, young and old, rich and poor, city, town, country, and all the villages and hamlets in between. And yes, those EU nationals who have made this country their home. And it is my fierce determination to get the right deal for every single person in this country.
In perhaps the most important letter she'll ever pen, the Prime Minister wrote of her hope to give reassurance quickly to the millions of EU citizens who live here and Brits abroad. We should always put our citizens first. We should aim to strike an early agreement about their rights, but no guarantees. The Prime Minister wants a free trade deal with the EU of greater scope and ambition than any before. A bold hope, seen as naive by some, to try to protect firms who do business around the continent from new rules and barriers. There was no overt threat to walk away, but a serious warning. A failure to reach agreement would mean our cooperation in the fight against crime and terrorism would be weakened. We must work hard to avoid that outcome. Her message: the EU needs us. She wants also to agree the terms of our future partnership alongside those of our withdrawal from the EU, to work out how we leave at the same time as sorting out the future. Labour aren't the only ones sceptical she can deliver.
If the Prime Minister can deliver a deal that meets our tests, that'll be fine, we'll back her. More than ever, Britain needs a government that will deliver for the whole country, not just a few. And that is the ultimate test of the Brexit deal that the Prime Minister must now secure.
The clock is ticking now.
Memories of today will be so different. A public party for some.
All right, Boris, I'm going to vote Brexit.
Even though that's not actually the Foreign Secretary.
Everyone unite as brothers.
Almost a wake for others. That's the sense in the home of the EU.
There is no reason to pretend that this is a happy day, neither in Brussels nor in London.
Some powers coming back from Brussels will bypass this place and flow to Holyrood, Cardiff and Stormont. But for Remainers here and in the Scottish Government, those promises don't go far enough.
Prime Minister still can't answer basic questions about what Brexit will mean for businesses, for the economy generally, and for the type of society we live in.
This 6 simple pages will do much to determine our place in the world in future. The letter is less abrasive in tone to the rest of the EU than when Theresa May started as Prime Minister, when she still had to persuade her party. She really was committed to leaving. Now the clamour of the referendum is gone. The tone is politely practical. The message of the letter: get real. You need us, and we need you.
Remember, we bring a lot to the table when it comes to policing and security and intelligence services, and I think that's a little, wasn't firing a shot, but she was just making a little reminder, just remember what's at stake here.
It is an enormous decision. I think it's a very exciting one, but I don't underestimate, the scale of the task that lies ahead in the next 2 years.
What has happened today is the biggest diminution in British power and sovereignty in my lifetime.
A letter which is really about kicking off a trade negotiation had 6 mentions of trade and 11 mentions of security. It struck me as being a kind of reckless series of threats.
Well, mate, thank you.
Not that he ever needs a reason to be pictured with a pint. Today, UKIP was celebrating.
Over the moon. Happy. I mean, today, for me, after 25 years of campaigning, the impossible dream came true. I'm very pleased.
And look who popped up later.
What matters now is we make sure we have a successful negotiation and we try and maintain a close relationship between Britain and the European Union.
And in a rare interview inside Number 10, the Prime Minister promised, despite all the challenges, our relationship with the rest of the continent will be just as good.
What we're both looking for is that comprehensive free trade agreement which gives that ability to trade freely into the European single market and for them to trade with us. It will be a different relationship, but I think it can have the same benefits in terms of that free access to trade.
An assertion that will take a lot to prove, one her counterparts in Europe struggle to believe. But Number 10's time for preparation is up. Now time to try to persuade. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So, as we've heard, the President of the European Council said he would not pretend it was a happy day, but said the remaining EU members are united and are determined to protect their interests during what he called the difficult negotiations ahead. Let's go to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who is in Brussels. Katya.
Well, George, the EU has now received that letter from London and it wants a bit of time to digest its contents. So we'll be hearing more about the EU's political guidelines for negotiations on Friday. In the meantime, the EU is really trying to take in the enormity of today. It has, of course, been a long road for the UK since the referendum, but the EU has been anxiously holding its breath as well, with many believing it may never come to today, the day that Article 50 is triggered.
The man with the burning letter in his briefcase.
Morning, big day, Ambassador.
Sir Tim Farrow arrived without much fanfare at the European Council building this morning, but
This isn't just an historic day for the UK. For the EU, it is a momentous, never to be forgotten kick in the teeth.
visibly unhappy, this was the recipient of Britain's letter starting the Brexit process.
So here it is, 6 pages.
Donald Tusk, the man who represents all EU member states here in Brussels.
There is nothing to win in this process, and I'm talking about both sides. This is about damage control.
So the letter's been delivered. What now? Well, the European Commission is the lead negotiator for the EU when it comes to Brexit. Frans Timmermans is the Commission's vice president. But how can negotiations even start, I wondered, with both sides at loggerheads? The UK wants divorce talks and talks of a new trade deal in parallel. The Commission says no. Divorce comes first.
Well, that's all part of how we negotiate.
But how do you square that
Everybody
circle?
starts with his own interest and tries to formulate his own interest in the best possible way. That's what we all do.
So what's the problem in having parallel talks, talking about trade at the same time as divorce, for example?
The position of the EU will be determined on the basis of a careful analysis of Theresa May's letter. There can be no future settlement if we're not very clear on how the divorce settlement is going to be.
To make 2 years of complex negotiations even thornier, the UK isn't talking just to the European Commission. The real power behind the throne lies in the EU capitals, Berlin, Paris, Rome, and 24 others. They will take any big political decisions for the EU when it comes to Brexit and a future trade deal. They don't and won't always agree with one another, and the Article 50 timeframe is very, very tight. Just before everyone heads into the lion's den, there were conciliatory noises all round in Europe today. Look at the front page of this German newspaper. And then this, from Germany's powerful Europhile Prime Minister.
We, the European Union, will conduct fair and constructive talks. I hope that the British government will approach the negotiations in the same spirit.
Chancellor Merkel also stressed the importance of deciding the fate of EU citizens living in the UK and British citizens in the EU ASAP. Brussels and London agree, thankful for one issue at least to unite around. Katya Adler, BBC News, Brussels.
In her statement today to MPs, Theresa May said she'd negotiate for the whole of the UK, taking into account the interests of the nations and regions. Well, let's see how her words have gone down. In a moment, we'll be talking to Chris Buckler, who's in County Tyrone, and Sian Lloyd in Cardiff. But first, to our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith in Edinburgh.
Scotland's First Minister today said she does wish Theresa May success with the upcoming negotiations because a good UK deal is in Scotland's interests. But she's not very optimistic about that. She also described the process as a leap in the dark. Now, the Scottish Government haven't been terribly impressed with the promise of a significant increase in powers for the Scottish Parliament that Theresa May mentioned today, because they say they haven't had any commitments on what new powers might come to Holyrood after Brexit. And of course, Nicola Sturgeon is busy writing a letter of her own at the moment, the one she'll send to the Prime Minister making a formal request for another Scottish referendum. But she already knows what the answer to that is going to be. Theresa May will tell her there can be no discussions about another referendum until this Brexit deal is done and Scottish voters have had a chance to see how it's working.
I'm standing at one of the 260 crossing points between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and this bridge will become part of the UK's only land border with an EU country. This river might be seen by some as a dividing line, but it's not treated like that by people who live here. They cross for work, they cross for access to healthcare, for other services, and of course for trade. And that's why the British and Irish government have been so strong in saying that they want these roads to remain completely open. But if anything, the European Parliament went further today, saying that they would not accept a hard border on the island of Ireland. And both the EU and Theresa May in her letter made very clear that they don't want anything that's going to threaten the peace process here. But in reality, Brexit has already been divisive. At Stormont, where of course the power-sharing government has collapsed. That collapse wasn't caused by the issue. However, Brexit does have the potential to fuel political differences. Irish Republicans have been listening very closely to what Sarah was talking about, that push for an independence referendum in Scotland. They point out that just as in Scotland, the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to stay inside the European Union. And they're calling for what they call a border poll, an independence referendum, a referendum really on Irish unity.
Wales voted to leave the European Union, and there was a recognition of that this morning by the First Minister Cadwyn Jones when he said that he would be working with the UK government to get the best deal for Wales. However, by this afternoon the cracks had begun to appear, and you really sensed his frustration when he said it was deeply regrettable that the Welsh government had not been able to contribute to the Article 50 letter and that the devolved administrations had been treated with a lack of respect. Now, he'd already voiced his concerns about the future of farming and economic subsidies here in the Senedd to Assembly members yesterday. He wasn't sure what would be happening after 2020. He said there were no guarantees. At the moment, some of the poorest parts of Wales share in £2 billion of grant aid. The leaders of the Welsh Conservative, Andrew R.T. Davies, he has said that that is scaremongering, and Theresa May said that the specific interests of the nations will be taken into account.
All right, Sian, Chris and Sarah, thank you all. Now, the clock started ticking from the moment the letter was delivered to Brussels this morning, and the parties will have 2 years to conclude negotiations on Britain's exit from the EU. So what happens next? On Friday, the European Council will make the next move by setting out its proposals for the negotiations to come. A month later, at an EU summit, the remaining 27 countries are expected to debate and then agree on those proposals. The talking will then start, but big decisions may have to wait till after the French and German elections held in May and September. The negotiations should finish by October next year, when the UK and EU parliaments will both vote on the final deal. That's the plan, but we are in uncharted territory. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, is at Westminster. Laura, ultimately, what have we learnt today about what the next 2 years might look like?
Well, George, I think the tone of these important 6 pages do tell us a couple of important things. First of all, that the Prime Minister feels the need to persuade the rest of the EU that we're not out to harm them, we're not out to do them any damage, that we still share what she described as European values. And I think that tells us that she is aware how difficult this may be. And there are hints between the lines too that she may be ready to compromise, that she is up for some form of give and take in different areas. But it's also absolutely plain that she's not just going to play nice. The letter mentioned very prominently the issue of security. Now, that has been something that's been mentioned before, but perhaps less quietly, and it's clear tonight she is willing to make that part of the negotiation. Now, her supporters would say that's just common sense, because this has to be a deal in the round. But it is controversial in some quarters, and it has raised some eyebrows here and around the EU. Her close confidants always say of the Prime Minister, you know, that she is fearless in the pursuit of what she wants to achieve. But, you know, my goodness, she will need to be. Just an early glimpse of the first responses from the rest of the EU. Just give a taste of the kinds of resistance that she may well face in the next couple of years.
All right, Laura, thanks very much. Thank you. Now, the EU referendum was one of the biggest votes in British history. 33.5 million people took part, revealing a nation deeply divided on the UK's relationship with Europe. So how do people feel now that the formal process of leaving has begun? Our home editor, Mark Easton, has been to Dover, where more than 60% of people voted to leave.
The ancient town of Dover reminds us of our closeness to mainland Europe, but also our distance. In the town hall, festooned with relics of Britain's complex relationship with the lands across the Channel, we've assembled 8 townspeople, 4 leavers and 4 remainers.
I'm a bit worried, nervous and put on edge.
I am excited. I'm really excited. I need something to change.
We briefed our Article 50 jury on what the negotiations are going to involve.
What I am proposing cannot mean membership of the single market.
We do need to take back control of our borders. Losing our single trade deal as part of it, it has to happen.
What about the trade stuff? Are you worried that economically we could take a hit, or do you think we'll be fine?
I think in the beginning we may well take a nosedive, but it's something we will recover from.
If we take a nosedive, who actually suffers? You know, it is the families.
If we end up as Billy No Mates,
yes,
we are going to be, the country's going to stagnate economically. And why should they trade with us?
I don't think it'll ever come out to be Billy No Mates, because this country is too well loved. All over the world, it's too well loved.
Yes, it is.
So I think we'll come out on top.
Just hope that this Brexit thing does not affect many people's, to divide peoples.
So you're worried that we somehow create division when we disentangle ourselves from the European Union?
It worries.
Yeah, that worries me too.
My son's 24 and it terrifies me. He and his generation might be in the situation that we end up in a war.
Really?
Well, I think it's up to us as people that voted out, making me feel more comfortable. That everything's going to be all right.
Let's imagine we get to the 2-year point, we haven't got a deal. John, what do you think should happen?
Walk away.
You would walk away?
Yes, walk away.
But
why?
what will be the result?
Do it on our own. and go out and put our arms out to the rest of the world for trade.
It will take a lot more than 2 years and more than 5 years, because look how long that they talk about it.
Just got to go in and show them that we do mean business, and we're not going to bow down to them.
They're unhappy, happy.
So how does our jury feel about triggering Article 50? We gave them emoji paddles. Happy, unhappy, or worried and confused?
Please vote now.
4 happy, 3 worried, 1 unhappy. Our jury, and indeed Britain, is deeply divided on its reaction to the triggering of Article 50, and similar arguments will be played out in the months of detailed talks ahead. Mark Easton, BBC News, Dover.
Returning to our main story, Britain's exit from the European Union. Let's sum up where we are at the end of today. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, is here. Kamal, through this whole debate, the economy has been a key issue. Were there any clues today in what we might be seeing on that front?
I think there were, George. This is often fashioned as a titanic struggle between the politics of Brexit, sovereignty, taking back control, less immigration, and the economics of Brexit, the freest possible trading relationship with the European Union. And I think today, to an extent at least, the economics won out. Theresa May talked about ensuring prosperity. She spoke about the need for an ambitious free trade deal. Wasn't it interesting that Philip Hammond was sat right next to Theresa May as she spoke in the House of Commons? He's the man, the Chancellor, in charge of the UK economy. There was no talk today of no deal being better. Walking away from a deal would be better than a bad deal. No talk of that. So quite a lot of conciliation. I think there's a big sense behind this in number 10. All the recent polling has revealed that for the public, Brexit and the economy have leapt to the top of their concerns. Theresa May knows that disruption to the relationship with our biggest trading partner, the EU, is an economic risk, but it's also a political risk for her.
All right, Kamal, thank you very much. And let's get a final word from Katja Adler, who's in Brussels. Katja, if I may, let me turn this on its head. I mean, what effect will Brexit have on the EU?
Well, George, while many in the UK celebrate Brexit as a chance for a brand new start, there are no upsides for the EU. It loses an influential member, a powerful economy, one of only 2 military powers in Europe, and a key contributor to the EU budget. And while EU leaders defiantly say that Brexit brings the rest of the EU closer together, it actually puts pressure on an already weakened EU whose members fall out over funding, over the euro, and over migration. So how will they keep a united front when each country has different priorities when it comes to Brexit? Poland, for example, it's more likely to want to appease the UK. It wants to safeguard the rights of its citizens living in Britain, whereas Germany puts politics over practicalities. It wants to ensure the integrity of the single market and the European Union as a whole. So there is only one ray of light for the EU. When it comes to those negotiations, it believes it has the upper hand, far less under time pressure than the UK to get a deal.
Katja, thank you very much.
History was made today with the Prime Minister telling Parliament that Britain is now formally leaving the EU and there is no turning back. A 6-page letter was handed to the President of the European Council, triggering Article 50 for the first time. It fired the starting gun on what will be 2 years of intense and extremely tough negotiations. And tonight the battle lines are already being drawn. There's even fierce disagreement over exactly what the talks themselves should cover. Theresa May has threatened to withdraw security cooperation if Britain doesn't get a good trade deal. In the first of our reports tonight, here's our political editor Robert Peston on the day Brexit begins.
A mail delivery that changed the course of British history at 12:20 this afternoon. Our man in Brussels, Tim Barrow, handing to Donald Tusk, President of the European Union, the letter from our Prime Minister that initiates fateful talks for the UK to leave the EU.
Prime Minister, are you ready for the fight ahead?
It was the moment Theresa May had been working towards ever since our referendum on June the 23rd led to her becoming PM. And getting our exit right will be the hardest challenge faced by any Prime Minister for perhaps 70 years.
This is an historic moment from which there can be no turning back. Mr. Speaker, I know that this is a day of celebration for some and disappointment for others. The referendum last June was divisive at times. Not everyone shared the same point of view or voted the same way. The arguments on both sides were passionate. But, Mr. Speaker, when I sit around the negotiating table in the months ahead, I will represent every person in the United Kingdom, young and old, rich and poor, city, town, country, and all the villages and hamlets in between.
The direction the Prime Minister is threatening to take this country in is both reckless and damaging. And Labour will not give this government a free hand to use Brexit to attack rights, protections and cut services.
Brussels, rejected by us. What's the mood as they decide whether to be nice or nasty in the divorce talks?
So here it is, 6 pages. As for me, I will not pretend that that I'm happy today. And what can I add to this? We already miss you. Thank you and goodbye.
What does the letter tell us about what Brexit actually means to Theresa May? Well, contrary to what the rest of the EU wants, the letter insists it's necessary to agree terms of our future partnership alongside those of our withdrawal from the EU. That's the big money we may owe Brussels. May also wants a deep and special partnership that takes in both economic and security cooperation, which looks like a threat that will trade our security expertise for our businesses getting good access to European Union markets, in that the letter says a failure to reach agreement would mean our cooperation in the fight against crime and terrorism would be weakened.
National security should not be used as a bargaining chip. It is far too important for that, because we cannot put ours or other European countries' security at stake.
The Prime Minister wants all of us, all the British nations, to pull together at this moment that will shape our destiny.
I think it's a hugely depressing day, both for Scotland and the UK as a whole. I am very sorry that the UK Prime Minister has not delivered on her agreement with the devolved administrations of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland before triggering Article 50.
But, predictably enough, he's happy.
I mean, I almost can't believe it's happened. I mean, after 25 years of campaigning for this, the impossible dream has come true.
The short goodbye, our ambassador to the EU's president, that begins the 2-year goodbye for Britain. Richer, safer, happier on our own? Right now, none of us can know for sure. Robert Peston, ITV News.
So that countdown has now officially started. In a little under 730 days, 5 hours and 24 minutes time, Britain will officially leave the European Union. Any deal must be struck by that deadline. And before that, there are many other important milestones. Tomorrow, Theresa May is expected to publish a white paper on the Great Repeal Bill, which will convert EU regulations into domestic law. And by the end of the week, Donald Tusk is expected to make his response, outlining his key negotiating guidelines. These will be then agreed by the 27 EU leaders at a special Saturday summit at the end of April. Intensive negotiations are expected to continue throughout the summer, with early discussions on the status of EU citizens living in the UK and British nationals living on the continent. It's hoped those negotiations will be finalised in time for the EU summit in October 2018. That would allow time in early 2019 for the European Parliament's 751 MEPs, including, of course, British members, to vote on the agreement, sealing Britain's fate. And this would mean Britain leaving the EU on the Prime Minister's target date, 29th of March 2019. Well, the European Council President Donald Tusk may have found time for a bit of sentiment today, but his overall message was a pretty sobering one. He said there are no winners from Brexit and negotiations are all about damage control. And other EU leaders and negotiators made it pretty clear the talks will be tough. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is in Brussels for us tonight. Carl.
Well, there was real emotion here today. I was in the room with Donald Tusk earlier, and he looked absolutely devastated by what was happening on his watch. But the first substantive reaction to Britain starting to leave the EU came from here in the European Parliament today, where, yes, there was sadness, but despite the sadness, there was also a degree of toughness creeping in to Europe's reaction. Britain's EU ambassador set out this morning to perform the single most significant task, perhaps of any British diplomat in living memory. Sir Tim Barrow was headed for the EU Council. Have you come to take back control, Ambassador? Where he would hand over the letter he carried in his briefcase and trigger Brexit. But within hours, the European Parliament had taken exception to Mrs May's linkage between trade and security.
I think that the security of our citizens is far too important to start a trade-off from one for the other.
The Parliament says EU nationals must keep their right to British residency right up until Brexit, but there can be no trade deal until after Brexit. There'll be a maximum of 3 years for the transition to that deal, and there can be no special deal for the City of London. The Commission, which will negotiate on behalf of the EU, also believe that a trade deal will have to follow a Brexit deal. And that raises the possibility of an almighty bust-up over sequencing before anyone even sits down here to talk about the issues. This afternoon, the most powerful figure in this drama also came out against a twin track. The negotiations must first clarify how we disentangle our interlinked relationship, she said. Only after that question is dealt with can we begin talking about our future relationship. But there did seem to be wriggle room in Brussels about starting to negotiate that future deal. How do you expect Mrs May to sell to the British Parliament and the British people a possible bill for leaving the European Union when they have no idea what the future relationship will be like?
I said the withdrawal agreement in the light of an agreement on your future relationship. That's in the treaty. So you're going to not have the details of your future relationship, but at least a common idea of what will be your future relationship.
Not everyone here thought it was a bad day. UKIP's MEPs celebrated the moment, which will put them out of a job. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Brussels.
Now, Theresa May insisted today that she'll negotiate a deal that works for all corners of the United Kingdom. But that won't be easy, with each nation pursuing its own demands and concerns. Our correspondents are on Northern Ireland's border, in Edinburgh and in Cardiff tonight. First to Martin Geisler in Londonderry. So, Martin, real concerns there.
Absolutely, Mary. I'm standing right on the Irish border now, not that you'd know. The only giveaway is that speed limit sign behind me in kilometres an hour. But that house there is in Ireland, and if you come around this way, this one here is in the UK. And 2 years from today, there's every chance these neighbours will not just be living in separate countries, but in separate customs unions with separate trade deals. So does that mean there will be a hard border here with customs posts on this road and so many others along this border? Theresa May insists that will not happen. She specifically mentioned it in her letter to Donald Tusk today. But for this trade to keep flowing freely here, 27 other countries will have to agree. And what about the movement of people? How can you keep a control on that? Remember, Brexit was largely sold on the premise that immigration would be curbed. People here say they have no idea what's going to happen, and the truth is, nor does anyone else.
Well, Theresa May says she wants a British Brexit. It's fair to say the Scottish Government will probably be her least willing partner in that. 62% of Scots voted last year to remain. Every single party that's represented in the Scottish Parliament wanted to stay in the EU, and today Scotland's own First Minister Nicola Sturgeon described the triggering of Article 50 as a giant leap in the dark by the Prime Minister, taking us all off the edge of a cliff with no idea of the landing place. So that gives you some idea of the opposition Theresa May can expect from the Scottish Government. The Prime Minister also has to be careful that the uncertainty around these Brexit negotiations and its unpopularity in Scotland does not inadvertently boost support for Scottish independence and another independence referendum.
Well, the Welsh First Minister said today that it was unacceptable that Theresa May had not consulted the Welsh Government over the contents of the letter that she sent to Brussels today. There is a fear that this is Brexit is a Westminster power grab and that somehow Wales will be left out of, won't be given the powers that it feels it should get once they are devolved, in a sense, back to the UK. Wales wants its bit, and that is a sense that is echoed around the Welsh Assembly here. We heard from Leanne Wood, the leader of Plaid Cymru, who said today that what Wales was being offered was no guarantees, instead just expectations. But it was left to UKIP to sign perhaps the positive note. Neil Hamilton, the UKIP leader, saying today that he was very happy and that this was a great day.
OK, Martin, Peter and Rupert, thank you. Well, there's a mixture of concern and expectation in England too, where Brexit, of course, found its strongest support. Our correspondent Emma Murphy went to Stratford-upon-Avon, where voting followed the same pattern as the national figure. And there she heard people's hopes and fears for the future.
Stratford-upon-Avon, quintessentially British, birthplace of Shakespeare and a microcosm of how the UK voted in the referendum. This area depends on foreign money from tourists and yet voted 51% to 48% to leave, the same split as the country as a whole. So on the day Article 50 is triggered, what do they make of that decision now?
I think we're taking a very big gamble, and a gamble that we don't need to take.
Unlike you, I think it's a calculated gamble.
At the Bridge Club, they know all too well about the importance of a good hand for their game and the country.
When Cameron went out, he had an unbelievably strong hand in his team, but he underplayed it. The EU was frightened of the domino effect, and he came back with very, very little. So I think if anyone here went, we'd do a better job negotiating than Cameron did. So I have every confidence in David Davis and everybody else.
I fear now that where we've got a timescale against us, then we're in a much, much weaker bargaining position. And in terms of trade, the EU are unlikely to give us anywhere near as good a deal as we've currently got.
Stratford is 93% white British. At the Barbers, I met Hungarian Ervin Bordeaux. He's been here 11 years and welcomes Theresa May's promise to seek clarity on the right to remain for EU citizens.
I don't think it's going to affect people like me who are here for many, many years and working hard, you know.
And what of the younger generation? Stratford-upon-Avon College has some students from across the EU. Cindy was born in Latvia but dislikes the mood since the referendum.
It feels like they want to just be the British and everyone else has to kind of go away. I feel a bit about the future. I don't know if I would want to build my own family here.
Among her classmates, including those from immigrant families, there's a belief that governance must be wrested back from Europe.
No one voted for them, but they're in charge. It sort of seems very undemocratic to me and doesn't make sense.
In Shakespeare's day, it was the knights who would fight for the future. Those securing it now may find they also face a hearty battle. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Stratford.
Political editor Robert Peston's here. So, Robert, a historic day, but already feeling like quite a long 2 years ahead.
Yes, that's exactly right. Today we got on that train, which will inexorably, over 2 years, take us out of the European Union, a project seen by many people as the most successful in history in delivering peace and prosperity to Europe. So a huge amount at stake for us, and it's why Theresa May today said that she wanted a deep partnership after we leave with the European Union, covering security, covering trade and prosperity. But already these talks have had a bumpy start. She was slapped down today by Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, the most powerful politician in Europe, who said that the Prime Minister's desire to negotiate on trade and the divorce bill simultaneously simply can't happen. So let's be absolutely clear. This is going to be one hell of a hairy ride.
OK, Robert, thank you.
There is no turning back, said the Prime Minister. The 2-year countdown to Brexit has begun, starting with a brief moment for the cameras as the formal exit note was handed over. But alongside Theresa May's talk of a deep and special partnership with Europe, a threat. Failure to agree a trade deal could weaken cooperation in the fight against terror. In a moment, the view from Europe. But from Westminster, with tonight's first report, our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Our man at the European Union carried the letter of notification into the Brussels EU building this morning.
Have you come to take back control?
Not long after, Theresa May left Downing Street to make her statement.
Are you taking back control, Prime Minister? Prime Minister, are you ready for the fight ahead?
The letter was handed over to the European Council President, Donald Tusk, who immediately tweeted with a hint of weariness, after 9 months, the UK has delivered.
A few minutes ago in Brussels, the United Kingdom's permanent representative to the EU handed a letter to the President of the European Council on my behalf, confirming the government's decision to invoke Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union. The Article 50 process is now underway, and in accordance with the wishes of the British people, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union.
The cheers were low-key in the Commons. Nearly 3/4 of MPs voted Remain. Back in Brussels, Donald Tusk still seemed underwhelmed by the level of detail in the letter.
So here it is, 6 pages. The notification from Prime Minister Theresa May triggering Article 50 and formally starting the negotiations of the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union.
Good afternoon, sir.
Back to the office, Britain's chief EU diplomat now reverts from postman to negotiator, with 2 years to finalise a Brexit deal.
Mr. Speaker, we understand that there will be consequences for the UK of leaving the EU. We know that we will lose influence. We know that we will lose influence over the rules that affect the European economy. We know that UK companies that trade with the EU will have to align with rules agreed by institutions of which we are no longer a part, just as we do in other overseas markets.
That was a rare acknowledgement of difficulties the country could face as Britain leaves the customs union and the single market. Theresa May implied a full trade agreement probably wasn't possible in the 2-year timescale. A transition period would be needed. In the letter to Europe's leaders over the Channel, Theresa May also warned that British anti-terrorism and military expertise might not be around if they don't cut a deal on trade. In security terms, the letter says, a failure to reach agreement would mean our cooperation in the fight against crime and terrorism would be weakened. Europe's security is more fragile today than at any time since the Cold War, Theresa May writes. Weakening our cooperation for the prosperity and protection of our citizens would be a costly mistake.
Labour will not give this government a free hand to use Brexit to attack rights, protections and cut services, or create a tax dodger's paradise.
He was heckled by SNP MPs who said he hadn't joined them in voting against Brexit. Now it was going ahead. They must have a second independence referendum.
If she denies Scotland a choice in our future, she will make Scottish independence inevitable.
The Right Honourable Gentleman has said this afternoon on a number of occasions, as he has on many occasions in this House before, that Scotland voted to remain in the European Union and should therefore be treated differently. My constituency voted to remain in the European Union. The point is that we are one united kingdom. We are going to take control of the things that matter most to us. And that is what this government is determined to do.
Where have I heard that speech before?
Mr. Speaker,
Nigel Farage said Theresa May had borrowed his script.
And it was like an echo chamber. I thought, she's saying things for which I was being condemned 10 years ago.
Even the Prime Minister who preceded Theresa May, speaking on a visit to Ukraine, had dropped his old script.
We looked at the European flag and we thought, well, we don't really like the European flag, we've got our own flag. We looked at the European Parliament and we didn't really like the European Parliament, we got our own Parliament, which we're very proud of. And look, I led the campaign to stay in and I didn't like the European flag and the European Parliament. We were always uncertain about that political union element.
44 years ago, another British diplomat walked into the European Community headquarters to deposit the letter joining Britain up. Another low-key event, history full circle.
We did what had to be done, which was act as postman, and that was it. There weren't millions of bottles of champagne or hugely important functionaries. It was not billed as a hugely glamorous occasion.
44 years on, no tears from this veteran diplomat.
5.5 years in the embassy in Paris had the effect of getting the scales to drop from my eyes about the prospect of a really fair deal for Britain. I voted for Brexit, yes.
Some of the messages of the anti-EU protesters didn't change at all over the years of membership. But as the process of negotiating Brexit begins, a friendly farewell from the Council President of the now shrinking European Union.
What can I add to this? We already in issue. Thank you and goodbye.
And Gary's with us here now in Westminster. Gary, as with all divorces, this is all about sequencing, isn't it? I mean, you have to fix the fact that you're separating and going your own way, and also the other terms, and that's what's going to happen here, isn't it?
And it's time limited. Not many divorces are. There's a 2-year ticking clock that starts now. The EU are absolutely insistent they want to discuss the Brexit terms first. That means the bill, and even if it's not an absolute number, they want to nail down a methodology, which will mean they've got parameters of a sort of number that we will pay, and Theresa May seemed to acknowledge we would pay something. And on EU citizens' rights, they want to nail that down. A couple of issues, other issues as well, probably. And interestingly, Theresa May's been pushing into that pile for early agreement the fact that she wants to nail down the idea there will be a transitional agreement, something they've been pretty squeamish about. You've got to get all that out the way. And then that probably gets you to probably January of next year. And October of next year is when Michel Barnier, the EU negotiator, says it's all got to be ready for negotiation. So you've basically got until the autumn of next year from January, if things work out well, to negotiate a trade agreement. So you can see why Theresa May's thinking more openly ever than now and saying it, that she probably needs a transitional arrangement.
And then there's this rather strange and rather dark reference to security and intelligence, as if in some way, if things don't go right, we won't be telling you about ISIS popping around the corner in Paris.
Or Putin charging his tanks over the border. I mean, you look at this letter, and Europe's security is more fragile today than at any time since the end of the Cold War. That's an extraordinary thing to plant as a sentence in the middle of this letter. And some European diplomats tonight are saying they feel that, although Theresa May's been playing this hand for a while, she is in danger of overplaying it, they say. Number 10 say it's not a threat, but that's not how people over there see it.
And then, of course, all these people are going to be so tied up in all this. I mean, just when there are crises over education, crises over the health service, no, they're all going to be fixated with trying to deal with this problem.
And it generates an awful lot of business over there in Parliament, huge amount of parliamentary time being taken up with new bills, regulations, which ones do you want to keep, which ones don't you want to keep. And one German diplomat was saying to me tonight, they're not at all sure that the UK is well enough prepared to deal with the workload.
Gary, it's going to keep us in business. Gary Gibbon. More from here in a moment, but first, over to Matt. He's in Brussels.
Well, look, John, there was plenty of genuine sadness here today about this divorce, but also some real steeliness, adding a few veiled threats and some very clear red lines. In other words, don't start trying to negotiate on trade before you finish the divorce. Don't try and pick off individual EU members because we're going to negotiate as one. Don't try and trade off security against commerce. I mean, what's really interesting here is that there seems to be a kind of real almost paranoia or suspicion that Britain will somehow try to stitch up the European Union and these negotiations. And I think unless that toxin can somehow be taken out of the talks, there could be real trouble, because on the surface they're trying to do the right thing. I think the main point here is that last year was all about politics. This year is all about diplomacy.
Have you got the letter?
British ambassador as mailman. Morning, Sir Tim. Can you show us the letter of no return, Sir Tim? Where's the letter, Sir Tim? That letter was delivered by land, by hand, the old-fashioned way, befitting the historic nature of its content. So Britain's representative here walked in through one door. Britain itself will walk out through another door in about 2 years' time. Between now and then, there'll be some very fraught and costly negotiations for both sides. Because this isn't just a piece of history that happened here today, it's also a massive slap in the face for the European Union at a time when it can least afford it. A few hours later, after mulling over the letter inside the egg-shaped pod that will host the actual divorce talks, the jilted partner had his say. A rare, raw moment in a body where the human emotion is often lost in translation and in committee.
There is no reason to pretend that this is a happy day, neither in Brussels nor in London. After all, most Europeans, including almost half the British voters, wish that we would stay together, not drift apart. There is nothing to win in this process, and I'm talking about both sides. This is about damage control.
At about the same time, outside the Old Hack pub, Ray Finch, the head of UKIP in the European Parliament, was celebrating victory.
This is the start of freedom for the United Kingdom. And more than that, it's the start of freedom for all of the peoples of Europe.
To the high priests of Europe behind their slab of windows, this is a small band of British hooligans who want to see the EU dismantled. To others, they represent the pitchforks of popular politics.
This is actually the second D-Day, and as usual, Britons are delivering. So I'm very happy today. It's like a breath of freedom in the city of Brussels today, actually. So I'm very happy for this. Now, again, Britain will set an example that the rest of Europe can follow.
Will they?
I think they will, absolutely.
As she passed the group, Alison Corney, interpreter in 4 languages, muttered an insult in at least one of them. They call it liberation.
They call it liberation, yes. Well,
What
I
do you
don't really
call it?
know. Well, I think it's, as I said, it's a great shame. I think we're far better off working together as member states in the European Union, and I think the UK is actually going to lose out.
She has no say in the divorce, but they do. Members of the European Parliament will have to approve the final deal, who represent 27 governments on the other side of the negotiating table and who are still dealing with a whole range of emotions triggered by Brexit.
I'm really sad. And you know, I'm a big lover of the United Kingdom and London, and I think so we will miss the whole industry, the technology, the people, the science, everything. I think so. This is a bad day for us.
From sad to sour, especially on the all-important rights of citizens. Why doesn't the European Union guarantee the rights of British citizens living in the EU, which would then trigger Britain guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens living in the UK?
What kind of rights? The right to vote?
To work, to live, to pay taxes?
To profit from health care without paying for it? A lot to discuss, I believe.
You can say that again. Just listen to the President of the European Parliament issuing a thinly veiled threat this afternoon.
The European Parliament must defend citizens' rights. This is why we need an agreement based on continuity, reciprocity and non-discrimination. Not reaching a deal on the right of citizens means not reaching a deal at all.
A hint of bad blood? It's all a far cry from the schmoozing in the park nearby. Or is it? Like any divorce, today's touches on something much more than trade and law. It's visceral, it's about broken hearts, and that hurts. It always does. There was a real balance today between warm words in letters and in a few speeches, not just here in Brussels, but also in places like Berlin, and then those veiled threats. And it is that balance that's going to be crucial. Well, let's talk to Ana Gomes. She's a socialist from Portugal, member of the European Parliament. Welcome to the programme. So first of all, when it comes to Britain, are you saying good riddance, or are you saying, I wish you stayed?
Well, probably both.
Both?
Yes, because it's not irrevocable. I mean, people can change their minds. It's not excluded. If you look at the text of the draft resolution that we are preparing in the European Parliament, it admits that possibility. But realistically, we regret very much. It's been a very sad day. But we respect the decision of the British people.
Now, it's really fascinating looking at the language coming out of that building there. You can see the giant egg-shaped pod where they'll be negotiating, and out of places like Berlin and Paris. There does seem to be this balance between veiled threats on both sides. So, for instance, let's talk about the veiled threat when it comes to EU citizens in the UK. They were very clear today, unless there can be a deal done on EU citizens in the UK, there will be no deal at all.
Yes, absolutely.
You agree with that?
And that is a priority for the European Parliament. We cannot accept that there will be degradation of European citizens residing in the UK until a severance agreement is there. And in the negotiations for that agreement, obviously, the rights of European citizens residing in the UK, as much as the rights of British nationals living in the European Union,
have to be guaranteed.
Our priority.
So
Absolutely.
why didn't you kick off the negotiations with a goodwill gesture and say, you know what, we are going to guarantee the rights of all UK citizens living in the EU, and then we hope that you follow suit? Someone's got to blink.
No, but this is the concern with reciprocity, with non-degradation of rights, both for Europeans living in the UK as for British nationals residing in the EU, is there.
But why not take a leap of faith?
Well, the question is, this is something you have with the citizenship of each member state. You then have the rights as a European citizen. If one of the member states decides to not be a member state anymore, of course this must have consequences. But that said, the interests of the citizens, both of the EU and the UK, are our first concern.
And very briefly, I mean, on trade, it is almost inconceivable that we talk about divorce without talking about trade in some form.
Yes, but first things first.
Okay.
And obviously we cannot enter into trade negotiations without having first finished the agreement on the severance of the ties.
Okay. Okay. Got to leave it there. Ana Gomez, thank you very much indeed. Well, you heard it there. There's an awful lot to discuss. It's going to get complicated. And one last point, John. We will make matters complicated. Journalists in their droves poring over every detail looking for stories. That's not going to make it easy. And Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the Commission, said that he will allow all 27 governments, including the Commission, to be very open about the details of negotiations. That's also going to make life for Theresa May, who wants to circle the wagons, a lot more difficult.
At Fry in Brussels, back here in Westminster. Before we came on air, I caught up with the Work and Pensions Secretary, Damien Green. Now, he's a close ally of the Prime Minister. He sits on the key Brexit Cabinet Subcommittee. You were a Remainer. Is this a joyous day for you?
Well, this is a day to put the past behind. I was indeed on the Remain side, but today is the day to look ahead. And I think anyone who sees the Prime Minister's letter, reads that or listens to a statement, will see how positive it is. The phrase repeated in the letter is that we want a close and special partnership with Europe. And I think that's an extremely sensible as well as positive attitude to take to these negotiations.
Well, I was going to quote her words: stronger, fairer, outward-looking Britain. Britain's best days are yet to come. When?
Well, when we get through this and for the future.
When is that?
Well, from now, that we need, first of all, to get a good deal in these negotiations, but we have a resilient economy. We are an outward-looking global country, and it's very important that we maintain the traditional British optimism to say, OK, we've now got a new relationship with the rest of Europe. We want it to be a positive relationship, but we can use that as a platform for Britain to have better days to come.
There was a strangely dark threat in the Prime Minister's speech, and that was about cooperation on security and intelligence. What was all that about?
I don't think anyone who either reads her letter or looks at her statement can say it was in any way threatening. It was making the simple but important point that as well as all the trade and economic agreements we want to come to, we need to come to an agreement on security as well, as part of
But that exists already. I mean,
exactly
we would
so.
never desert Europe on intelligence and security, would we? If there were a bomb in Paris and we knew who'd done it, we'd ring them up and tell them.
Of course we do. But
so
that's
what's
what we
all
do.
this about?
This is
a sort of kind of, if you don't behave, we're going to whack you over the head with intelligence and the rest of it.
That's a ridiculous misinterpretation. What there are existing EU structures for the intelligence and security cooperation that make us safer and make other countries in Europe safer as well. What we will have to do is recast those because we won't be members of the European Union. But the Prime Minister made clear in her statement in the House that she absolutely wants that close security cooperation to continue.
But this is a much warmer, much more emollient kind of approach to the EU than anyone was discussing in the course of campaigning to get out of it.
Well, that may be so, but I think that's perfectly sensible. The point about today, it is, as we all agree, a historic day. It allows us to reset Britain's relationship with Europe. Resetting it in a positive way from outside the European Union is good for us and good for the rest of Europe.
Well, now, the great thing hanging over the whole business has been that no deal is better than a bad deal. Does that still pertain?
Well, yeah, of course it does. But
so we could have no deal.
Well, let's hope not. And as the Prime Minister and we've all made clear that what is best for us and best for Europe is a deal that helps the citizens of Europe, both Europeans living here and Brits living in other European countries. We want that to be an early priority. We want as free trade as possible. We want the security aspect sorted out. Many other things. We want to keep the open border with the Republic of Ireland, which of course will be outside. They'll be inside the EU. So there are a lot of detailed measures, but because it's in both sides of the negotiations' interest for these to succeed. I'm optimistic that we can have a positive neighbourly relationship in the future.
And let's sort of cast 5 years hence from now. Do you think it'll all be settled and hanky-dory?
There might be a few implementation arrangements that are still required. Some things, obviously, we've got 2 years to do the negotiations, which I'm sure we can succeed in. It may be that some of the details require a few years implementation after that. So at some stage beyond that, then the new relationship will be completely cast, and I hope and expect it to be a positive one.
So to return to my first question, it may have started as a sort of unhappy event, but you're now resigned to it, and it is now a joyous day.
Well, it's now my job and the job of everyone in government to get the best deal for Britain, and that's what we're doing. And if we can create the close partnership, the special partnership with Europe that the Prime Minister has talked about, then it will be good all round for us and for the other countries of Europe.
Damien Green, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome to Hull, and we're in the beautiful City Hall, in the centre of a city which, for the most part, has been waiting for this day to come. Hull voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU. More than 67% of voters said they wanted out. Tonight we're joined by an audience of business people, students and some of the city's migrant population, some celebrating but some much more anxious about today. And we're going to ask what happens now. First, in a city which voted for Brexit, will Brexit now deliver for the city and beyond? Over centuries, the Humber estuary transformed Hull into one of the UK's most important and prosperous port cities. But the post-war years were less than kind. The fishing industry experienced near-terminal decline, and the city was hit hard by austerity. Today, it's the UK capital of culture, an idea borrowed, of course, from Europe. But European ideas are not the only import to Hull. According to one pro-EU group, up to £40 million a year flows in from Brussels' coffers. That money didn't stop many here feeling left behind. The referendum seen as an opportunity to kick back against not just Brussels, but Westminster too. So what will Brexit mean for the so-called gateway to Europe? How ready are Hull's people for the changes which lie ahead? So to help me answer that question, I'm joined by this audience from people across the city. Steve Arnott, you're a warehouse worker. You voted out. This is your day, isn't it? How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I feel hopeful, you know, that what the future brings will be good for us. And, you know, I feel a bit apprehensive because everything's a little bit vague at the moment. I don't really...
Is it more vague than you anticipated?
Yeah, definitely a lot more vague than I anticipated. But yeah, I feel hopeful that in the future it'll be good for us and it'll be good for my children and my children's children as well, so...
Deanna Davison, a student, you also voted out. Any regrets, any wobbles today?
Not at all. I'm excited, and as Steve said, I'm also hopeful. I think in years to come, people will look back on today as the day that Britain again took a step onto the global stage and again started to become a great power.
So nothing but positive thoughts today?
Yes.
Faye Marsden, do you share that positivity? You're a care leaver who now helps young people find work with the help of EU funding.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't share the optimism. I'm quite apprehensive as I work for a youth project called The Warren, and we receive money from the European Social Fund to address the skills gap in our own labour market, and it's part of 6.6 million given to the city from the European Social Fund. So I don't know where that's going to come from
So
in the
worrying
future.
for you today?
Yes, certainly.
Sean McAllister, is it a day you wished had never come? Are you sanguine about it now?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's a very great moment in Hull to have City of Culture and to have the world looking at us finally. But at this time, to be making this decision is insane. To be signing a blank contract and then discussing the terms 2 years later, why don't we do it the other way around when we know what we're signing for?
Do you still harbour hopes that this won't happen?
Well, I kind of harbour hopes that in 2 years' time or 10 years' time or whenever we get round to getting to the results, maybe 20 years' time, we get round to going back to the people saying, do you really want to do this?
Second referendum?
Absolutely.
What does everyone else make of that? A couple of thoughts from the audience, please.
Well, when it comes to a second referendum, I'm absolutely certain that if the British people had voted to remain last June, we wouldn't have been saying, oh, in a couple of years' time, do you want to have another try again? No, the people voted to leave, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We've got to respect that decision. It's just a red herring, this second referendum.
They were hoodwinked by the media, the right-wing media.
Oh, rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
All right.
This was a second referendum. I voted in the first referendum. So what we're looking at is a third referendum, potentially.
What I want to talk about, though, Steve mentioned just there that things are a bit more vague than he'd anticipated. Now, of course, there's a lot of talk about this bill. Up to 60 billion euros they're talking about a bill before we can leave. Who among those people who voted leave anticipated this? Bill Palfreman.
I anticipated them trying to impose costs on us. I mean, this is the way the EU has behaved for all the entire 40-something period of our membership. I certainly don't think we should be paying any money to them after we leave. I think that would be foolishness.
So you used to be UKIP branch secretary in Hull, is
yes,
that right?
That's correct,
and
at the time of the referendum.
You think we should just say, no, we're not paying and walk away?
Ultimately, there is nothing to negotiate. Having free trade with Europe is mutually advantageous. And those people, they're talking about the billions in payments, those are ultimately two people who were EU employees. There's no reason to pay them.
In the run-up, though, did anyone here talk of this billion-euro bill? Was that one of the things that perhaps wasn't very clear?
Mentioned it. It was not mentioned by Leave or Remain because it was never.
And what do you feel about that?
It's not. I don't think we will pay. To be honest, I don't see how they could make us pay a leaving fee. It's something that, we don't owe them any money. We pay into it on a daily basis. So. We've paid for services rendered. We don't owe them money.
Is it just got to be about money, Jackie? I mean, there are ideals here about peace and cooperation, which have kept the peace in Europe for 60 or more years, and we've just kicked those ideals in the teeth and said to the rest of Europe, we're not bothered. We're going to go off on our own. We don't care what happens to you. If I was a European, I would wonder what on earth is going on this island.
Well, we had peace in Europe before we joined the EU in 1972.
We had it before. The EU's kept that peace for 60 years.
The UN's kept
NATO is pivotal in that.
Lord Haskins, they call Hull the gateway to Europe. This city has just said a pretty strong no to the European Union. Can it survive outside? Clearly people think it can.
Well, it can. I mean, I think it is a disaster, but disasters are there to be dealt with. And a lot of things have to be done with this economy. Hull will probably suffer
more than the rest of the country because of its close links with Europe. It'll also suffer because we're very dependent on migrant labour in certain areas. Our hospitals here are losing people already quite seriously. But those issues can be dealt with if we can persuade people of Hull, young people of Hull, to tackle the skills problem and to get ready to do the jobs that will be ready, will be available.
So can it survive without migrant labour, do you think?
I don't think it will need to survive without migrant labour, because one of the things the government is already doing is recognising belatedly that we need migrant labour in the hospitals to keep them going.
Jeremy Wong, you know, you're a businessman here. I'll come to you in a second. Jeremy Wong, you're a businessman in the area. You know, the EU, you know, Hull needs migrant workers.
I think Hull's reached saturation point with migrant workers, to be perfectly honest. As the owner of one of the largest letting agents in the city, a third of my stock is with migrant workers.
So they help your business, don't they?
Well, yes, they do help my business, but again, at the end of the day, I can't be prejudiced about who I rent a house to.
Would you rather not rent to them?
I can't be prejudiced or racist about who I rent a house to.
But you think we've reached saturation point?
Absolutely.
Olga Yaruchi, you're a Romanian citizen. How do you feel about the idea that Hull has reached saturation point?
Oh, I'm absolutely worried about the Brexit because I don't know what we have to expect of the day of tomorrow because the lack of information of our rights of citizen of EU.
So are you worried that at some point you may be told to go home?
Yeah, absolutely. But home we finished our life and we begin here, the new one. The main reason why we came here is our daughter, because she is doing a professional tennis, and that's why we are here.
So you're sad, you're nervous, frightened?
Absolutely.
How do people feel about that? Gina?
Well, I don't want to see anybody leave, and I feel really terrible that we've spoken, and it feels racist. I don't know anybody that's made this decision based on anything other than border control.
But given that people across the country, immigration was a key factor in voting leave, that idea that we should have control of our borders, we should control immigration, what's wrong with that?
But how is that going to change? It's not really about that. Most of the people I know that voted leave based it purely on they're scared of brown people and people with accents. I don't know anybody that made a decision that wasn't about that.
Boys, gentlemen at the back, boys, forgive me. It's because I'm so old.
Yeah, I just kind of find quite sad that people that voted leave are being all tarred with the same brush as being racist and just hating foreigners. It's just stupid, really. There's plenty of reasons for leaving it apart from immigration. There's sovereignty, there's trade deals, there's
I want to come on to that in a moment, but on that issue of immigration, lots of people did vote because of immigration. Is it right that we should have control of our own borders?
Yes.
Is Brexit going to deliver on what many people wanted, which wasn't just control, it was less immigration?
Jackie, before 2004, when the 8 acceded to the Union, Hull's population had been dropping for 50 years. I was the leader of the council then, and the government was telling me to demolish more than 5,000 houses because they thought our population would continue to drop and there'd be no demand for them. Our economy's been turned around by our membership of the EU, in this city particularly. Siemens, if they were making the decision to come here now, which has been a huge thing for Hull, probably would have gone to Denmark, frankly. They wouldn't come here because we're leaving the European Union.
What about people who voted leave and for whom immigration was an issue?
Just say on that point there with Siemens, they obviously knew there was going to be a referendum, so if that was such a massive issue, why move? Why not wait till the referendum?
Even Cameron thought we'd stay.
You know, it's ridiculous.
Siemens in their risk report of the year before they constructed the whole site did not actually mention the possibility of Britain leaving the EU as a risk factor, which...
But on that issue of immigration, David Davis, the Minister for Brexit, has already said, he said this week, under post-Brexit, immigration could go up as well as down, dependent on what we needed. Now, is that what you voted for?
Yes. I mean, not to have an increase in absolute terms, but
he's talking about the possibility at some point of immigration going up.
A filtering process where people come into the country based on us having a skill shortage in that area, and not vast numbers of trades and lorry drivers and so on being displaced from their work.
Why not treat someone from Australia the same as someone from Austria? Why is it we should discriminate against people who are outside the EU?
But was it your understanding that immigration would go down?
No.
Or was it possible that it might go up?
It was my understanding that we would have a liberal, fair, generous immigration policy, but one that we've decided, one that we can say, actually, you know, we have
And you think
a
this government
vast...
will give you that?
Yeah, I do. And actually, I think we have a lot of people from a lot of countries outside and in the EU who come to work here because they want to work in the UK.
From over here, just wait if you would.
Okay, I think it's a real shame that some people here have voted leave on the basis of an immigration policy and an immigration law. And just to add what was said in the back in terms of being coloured as well, as you can tell, I think that we bring a lot to the table. It's not just unskilled labour that may lack in the UK. We have culture and different things that we can bring to the table, and that's something that I've learned in business school myself. So I know what I bring to the table when I enter different industries, and I think that's important to remember, that it's not just about labour, but it's about what we can bring, tea, coffee, different things from around the world. You need to remember that.
It's also one of the best things about university is the experience of the diversity, the different cultures, the different people. Is actually it's worrying that, you know, if anyone wanted to restrict that, it is a massive selling point of going to uni. You get to meet so many different types of people, and it just really adds to the experience that you get here.
So did you vote Remain?
I was a Remainer, yeah.
And are you nervous now about, do you share Olga's fears, your friends' fears about what it means for integration?
There's going to be some interesting sort of impacts on students, and it does worry me. I think it's one of those things. I think it's about time it's going. We need to move on with it, but we just got to get it right.
You're shaking your head, sir. Tell me why.
If we've got immigrants here already who are working, then why will we let them leave? Why do we want them to leave this country? They're not going to, are they?
But you make us feel unwelcome when you say views like that. I'm a British citizen, but I don't see a future in England for the rest of my life. Because of this, I feel unwelcome here now.
Do you accept that
I think
this lady, Olga, they feel nervous because of...
Yeah, they can feel nervous, but I just don't think... I don't think they're going to need to. They're going to stay here.
What have we got to stay for, though?
Well, they've still got labour. You're going to come here to work. That's what you've just said you're going to be here for. We're not going to say in 2 years' time you've got to leave.
Actually, only 45% of EU nationals come here for work. The non-EU nationals that come here, 41% of them come to study. I'm a British citizen, as I've said, but I don't see a future here after Brexit if so many people voted on the basis of immigration when my parents migrated here.
From the EU?
No, they were from non-EU.
So from non-EU they came here, so what's the problem?
Because when you say immigration, you're looking at the world as a whole. You're not just tackling just
Pretending
Europe.
that immigration is a good thing from their point of view.
I mean, that was one of the stories, or one of the issues that was raised, that actually it's about a fair playing field for non-EU migrants.
Exactly right.
So you don't mind in principle, as someone who was the branch secretary of UKIP, you have no problem with immigration going through the roof as long as it's fair?
I would definitely have a problem with immigration going to the roof. What I would want to see is it targeted to particular skills and based on points.
The immigration, when we voted leave, we voted to choose who we want to come. If we need people to come, then people will come. If we don't, then we don't need them, we don't want them.
And you...
Too long migration, high migration has been blamed for the lack of housing, schools, hospital places. Then build more homes, build more schools. You know, our population is growing, so let's build more. You know, you said a third of your stock is... So build more houses so we can fill them, you know, with more people.
I mean, there is an issue, isn't there, about pressure on services?
We have 57,000 empty buildings in Hull. We're not full. We're not even nearly full. And it's just, it leaves a horrible taste in my mouth that this is even part of the discussion, that people can't come to our country.
I took part in debates all over the country. And this issue of immigration was always brought up, and I always said all the time, it's not to do about immigration for me.
It is for a lot of people.
Yes, but the fact is, well, nobody believes you either, Colin.
I do.
Nine
times, and you've never been elected.
Well, here we go again.
Well, you've never been elected, Andrew.
Colin,
I've won 9 elections in Hull. You've never been elected.
Yes, okay, blah, blah, blah.
Well, you've said that last year.
Very quickly.
The fact is, yes, immigration could go up, but I haven't got a problem with that. It's whatever the economy needs. And as far as people being welcome, students should be welcome to study here. I value that diversity, and I know a lot of leavers who value that diversity as well.
So if the impression was given that immigration would come down, it doesn't matter that actually that's not true.
Look,
Was
immigration...
Nigel Farage valuing diversity when he stood in front of that poster, that racist poster? Let's call this what it is. This is thinly veiled racism and nothing more.
I am head of campaigns of the Freedom Association. I am not a member of UKIP. I do not speak for
when you lie down
UKIP.
with dogs, you get up with fleas, sir. You know, you associate with these people. This is thinly veiled racism and nothing more.
I associate
Sorry,
with
one at a time. I actually can't hear you. What was your point, sir?
My point is that this entire campaign from UKIP and their ilk is nothing more than thinly veiled racism.
On what basis do you make that claim?
But that poster that your leader
excuse me,
stood
the
in
country
front-
at large voted Leave. Are you saying the country at large is
Absolutely
racist?
not. No, I'm saying that these people who led the Leave campaign with their lies and thinly veiled racism are part of an anti-immigration racist view.
Very quickly from the two...
Can I just say, you asked at the beginning, you asked Steve if he thought his life would be better. I genuinely do not believe it will be better because of this. It will be worse.
We're going to talk about a little bit more about that after the break. On that for the moment, thank you very much. But join us after the break when we'll carry on the discussion here in Hull, asking, will being British mean something different post-Brexit? Join us in a moment. Welcome back to Hull, and I'm here with an audience of people from across the city to ask what happens now Brexit is actually underway. Now, I wanted to ask something about how people's lives will or won't change after Brexit. I spent some time in Grimsby with people working in the fish market. Most of them leavers. Most of them said they didn't feel materially their life would get any better, but they were still delighted they'd voted Leave, and it was about control, it was about power. How many people feel that that's what this was really about? Someone we haven't heard from, so why?
I'm just pleased that we're regaining sovereignty. It's for too long power's been resting in Brussels over so many areas of our lives, and I'm happy that it's finally coming back to us.
Does it matter whether your life does or doesn't improve? Is the key thing for you sovereignty?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I think my life will improve, but at this stage it's still very early days, as we've heard from around the room. But I am pretty optimistic that going forward, we'll be okay.
Ali, you work in Hull, you run a cafe?
That's right, yeah.
How do you think things will change for you?
I'm just super sad about the whole thing, to be honest with you. I think on a ground level, it probably isn't going to change that much immediately. We've had a massive boost to the city with the City of Culture. I mean, we have already seen our coffee prices go up 15%, just the drop of the strength of the pound. So that's...
But what about that argument about sovereignty, about being in control? That didn't hold sway for you?
No, I feel like Europe have been doing a pretty good job for the last, well, all my life. I've never known anything different.
And being British, do you feel British, European, both, neither?
I've always seen myself as European. I've got a European passport. I've travelled extensively in Europe. I think it's really important not to have any borders.
At the back.
I believe that a lot of people ignore the positives that come out of Brussels. So, as a passionate Remainer and environmentalist, I believe that tackling climate change is the most pressing global issue currently. So,
sorry, can I ask you, do you feel European as a young person?
I do feel European, but mostly I feel that we need to be tackling climate change on an international, global level and working together, and this is something that the EU provided the opportunity for. So.
What about that idea of being in control?
We didn't lose sovereignty, we shared it. I mean, some of these people here don't really understand democracy or the concept of sharing. Quite why this UKIP person behind me can't understand that the European Parliament is actually more democratic than our own because it's elected by proportional representation and ours isn't. What proportion of people in the UK voted for a Tory government?
Clapping about falsehoods. Why are you wasting your time on him?
Well, you know all about falsehoods when you put £350 million saying we'd go back into the NHS. That's a falsehood. That's a falsehood. That people vote.
Saving money by leaving the EU is not a falsehood.
You lied to the electorate about that money going into the NHS.
It's not false to say
you brought up
that you
falsehoods.
save money by leaving the EU.
What about that idea of being in control? What does that actually mean now to your lives?
It means that the people who are making our laws are a little bit closer to us, a little bit more accountable. The more layers of bureaucracy you have, the further up you go.
Who here feels that Westminster has listened to you?
How many people can name their MEPs? Because you're in politics. I can name some of my MEPs because I'm interested in politics, but actually, the average person much more likely to name the local councillor, the local MP, than they are MEP because I don't feel connected to them.
Can I just put, sorry sir, can I just put this point to you though? Just 1 second, can I put this point to you? This area was an area that got a lot of money, funding from the EU over the years, hundreds of millions over the years. Is there any sense from any of you that if you say goodbye to the EU, Westminster will pick up the slack, that Westminster will start listening to people who have often told me when I've been up here, nobody's listening to us politically?
I think they'll have to.
Yes.
They'll have to, yeah.
They're already doing it. I mean, Colin, let someone else get a word in edgeways, please. We're already seeing it to some extent from the Northern Powerhouse Minister, Andrew Percy, who is a Hull lad. He's already devoted a hell of a lot of money to the Humber LEP. We've seen that. We've seen money coming to the north.
Lord Haskins, please, tell me, do you think Westminster will be able to pick up the slack? Do you think that the argument I've constantly heard when I've been up here before is people aren't listening to us, Westminster doesn't care? If the EU goes with the EU funding that this area has had, will Westminster pick up the slack?
Well, if the economy is not doing as well as it is at the moment, there'll be less money there at any rate, you know, so that's a problem. I think that there's a general view that, for example, farmers will do badly out of it because the European farming lobby has been strong. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. So I think that the question of support, continued support, is something that depends upon how well the economy is doing and what party's in power.
Sean McAllister, what difference do you think it will make to people in Hull? What changes to the identity? You know, the City of Culture is an amazing celebration. What happens now, as far as you're concerned?
I think the poor will be worse off. I think people like Steve will be worse off. I think the Joseph Rowntree Foundation are going to, was reading a report that they're going to release shortly that shows that the people in the most impoverished areas are the people who voted for this Brexit that are going to be the ones that are going to suffer.
Really briefly, I just want to say, a show of hands if you would, who thinks you'll be better off in 2 years' time? And who worries? I know you wanted to get in. Do you worry about the future?
As a young person, I think we have been greatly underrepresented. And when we talk about sovereignty, we've ignored an entire section of society. I'm a college student myself, and I didn't get to vote in Brexit. And I feel that, you know, Westminster, all these older gentlemen are overbearing over us here tonight as well. And it just shows that we have been ignored, and I think we'll continue to be ignored. I think other young people can agree.
Anyone else on the future? Very briefly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about free trade within the European Union and how that's benefited the United Kingdom. The reality is, it's not a free trade bloc, it's a protectionist bloc. Whilst we were in the European Union, we do not have the ability to trade with our Commonwealth partners or any other countries across the globe.
We are going to have to end it there. I'm really, really sorry. What I would say is I'm sure we will be back to talk to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. That is all from us here in Hull, from Matt in Brussels and John in London. That's Channel 4 News. Have a very, very good evening. Thank you very much.
That's all, folks.